The house was still buzzing with leftover laughter when Sarah started clearing the plates. The party had gone better than she expected. Her husband David's friends had filled the living room with stories, jokes, and a comfortable warmth that made the evening feel alive. Now that it was over, she felt the familiar quiet settle in, the kind that always followed once everyone left. She stacked dishes, wiping crumbs from the table, her mind still half in the sound of their laughter. The soft hum of the dishwasher filled the silence, and for a moment, she felt content. She looked toward the living room, expecting to see only the dim light from the fireplace. But there, still sitting on the couch with a half-finished glass of wine, was Mark David's oldest friend. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or standing to leave. He was just sitting quietly, watching the flames flicker. Sarah smiled faintly and called out, "Didn't realize you were still here." He looked up, smiling back. "Yeah, I thought I'd help you clean up before heading out." "You don't need to," she said lightly, placing another plate into the sink. "Maybe not," he replied, standing up and walking toward her. "But I want to." She wasn't used to that. David's friends usually offered polite thanks and hurried off after the party, their laughter fading down the driveway. Mark, however, stayed calm, unhurried. He carried a few glasses from the living room, rinsed them without being asked, and handed her a towel. It was such a small gesture, yet it filled the silence in a way she hadn't expected. "You really went all out tonight," he said, drying his hands. "The food, the decorations, everything, it was perfect." Sarah smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "Thank you. It's not that hard. I just like when everyone feels comfortable." "That's exactly what you do," he said quietly. "You make things feel easy. I don't know how you do it." There was something gentle in his tone, not flirtatious, not too personal, but sincere. Sarah wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply shrugged. "Habit, I guess." He chuckled softly. "You make it sound like a job." She turned off the tap and looked at him, tilting her head. "In some ways, it is. Keeping everything running, keeping people happy can be exhausting." Mark nodded, leaning against the counter. "I get that. But I don't think people realize how much you actually do. Most hosts just throw things together, but you care?" Sarah looked down at the counter, feeling something tighten in her chest. Compliments weren't new, but lately they felt rare. David had been distant these past months, distracted by work and long hours. Their conversations had become short and practical about bills, groceries, or plans for the week. She couldn't remember the last time anyone told her she was doing something well, or that it mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." For a moment, they stood there, surrounded by the soft hum of the dishwasher and the ticking clock on the wall. The house felt strangely peaceful, almost too still. Then Mark broke the silence. "You must be exhausted. You've been on your feet all night." Sarah laughed lightly. "You noticed?" "Hard not to," he said, smiling. "You didn't sit down once." She sat at the edge of the kitchen island and motioned for him to do the same. "I like keeping busy," she said. "If I stop moving, I'll fall asleep." He chuckled and took a seat across from her. The air between them felt different, now quiet, comfortable, with no pretense. For the first time that evening, Sarah allowed herself to relax. "I remember the first time I met you," Mark said suddenly. "You had just moved into this house." David kept showing it off like it was the biggest achievement of his life. Sarah smiled, remembering that day. It was a mess back then. Half the boxes weren't even unpacked. "Maybe," he said, "but even then you made it feel like home. You've got that." Touch. She felt her cheeks warm slightly, but tried to hide it with a laugh. "You're being kind." He shook his head. "No, I mean it. David's always been the type who runs toward the next big thing. You're the one who makes the moments matter." That sentence stayed with her. It wasn't something grand or romantic, it was something real. Something that made her heart ache a little because it reminded her of what she'd lost somewhere along the way. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Sarah traced a circle on the counter with her finger, lost in thought. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes I wonder if he even notices anymore. Not in a bad wits, just life gets busy." Mark nodded. "Yeah, I think that happens to a lot of people." She looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no judgment there, just understanding. The kind of understanding that comes from experience. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. I've known David since college. He's one of the most focused people I've ever met. But sometimes I think he forgets how to slow down." Sarah smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." "Ah." Mark gave a small nod, his voice softening. "You deserve to be seen, Sarah. You really do." The words caught her off guard. She didn't know what to say. No one had said something like that to her in years. For a moment, she wanted to brush it off, pretend it didn't mean anything, but it did. It meant everything. She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The clock ticked again, steady and slow. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the trees against the window. The night felt heavier, more intimate somehow. Mark stood after a moment, collecting his jacket from the chair. "I should probably head out. It's getting late." Sarah nodded, though part of her wished he would stay just a little longer, not because of anything romantic, but because talking to him had reminded her of something she'd forgotten about herself. As he walked toward the door, paused and turned back. "Hey," he said softly, "don't lose that spark, okay? The one that makes you who you are." She smiled, though her throat felt tight. "I'll try not to." And when the door closed behind him, the house fell silent again. Sarah stood for a moment in the kitchen, surrounded by the soft hum of the dishwasher and the faint scent of wine. She looked at the empty chairs, the faint glow of the lights reflecting off the counter, and felt something stir inside her, a quiet realization. She wasn't just a hostess. She wasn't just someone's wife. She was still her own person, still capable of feeling, of being seen, of mattering. For the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't rush to turn off the lights. She sat there for a while longer, thinking about the evening, replaying every word of that unexpected conversation. She didn't know what it meant yet, or why it had affected her so deeply. But one thing was certain: something inside her had shifted. That night, as she went upstairs and looked at her sleeping husband, she didn't feel angry or sad. She just felt awake, and though she didn't realize it then, that small, honest moment at the kitchen table would change everything in ways she never expected. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, catching the edges of unwashed glasses still left from the night before. Sarah moved slowly, her body tired but her mind restless. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, Mark's words echoed in her head. "You deserve to be seen." It wasn't just a compliment. It was like a mirror she hadn't looked into in years. David came down the stairs, his usual hurried steps carrying him straight to the coffee machine. "Morning," he said, barely glancing her way. "Morning," she replied, forcing a smile. He grabbed his mug, scrolled through his phone, and asked about his schedule. "Did I tell you I have to meet the clients early today?" "No," she said softly, "but I figured." He nodded absently. "You were great last night. Everyone said you outdid yourself again." She smiled faintly. "Thanks." That was it. No real conversation, no warmth. Just words passed between them like notes left on a counter. When he left, the door closing behind him, the silence returned. Only this time, it didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where she and Mark had talked hours earlier. She ran her hand over the wood surface, remembering how comfortable it had felt to just talk. That kind of connection, simple and honest, had become rare. She wasn't looking for anything more. She just missed being heard. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mark. "Thank you for last night. You made the whole evening feel special. I hope you got some rest." Her first instinct was to ignore it. But she didn't. She typed back carefully. "Thank you for helping clean up. It was nice to talk. Have a good day." She hit send before she could overthink it. For a moment she stared at the screen, half expecting another reply. When one didn't come, she let out a slow breath, and turned back to the sink. The rest of the day went by in routine. Grocery shopping, laundry, checking in with her daughter about college classes. It was all normal. But under it all, she felt a quiet awareness she couldn't shake. She wasn't doing anything wrong, yet she felt like something inside her had been quietly awakened. That evening, David came home later than usual. His mood was good. Business had gone well. "We should go out this weekend," he said as he loosened his tie. "Maybe take a drive somewhere. It's been a while." Sarah looked up, surprised. "That sounds nice." He smiled briefly, but his attention drifted back to his emails. Still, it was something. Maybe he was trying, she thought. Maybe things weren't as distant as they'd begun to feel later that night. As she was folding laundry in the living room, her phone buzzed again. This time, another message from Mark. "Sorry if this is out of place, but I've been thinking about what we talked about. You reminded me what it's like to actually connect with someone." Sarah read it twice, unsure how to feel. His words weren't romantic. They were reflective, almost grateful. She typed slowly. "I think we both needed a reminder of that." He replied almost instantly. "Maybe so. You've got a way of making people open up. I didn't expect that." She smiled softly, shaking her head. "You're giving me too much credit," she muttered. "No," he texted. "I mean it. You listened differently. Most people talk to fill silence. You talk to understand." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she wrote, "Sometimes silence says more than words." There was a long pause before he sent, "You're right." That was the last message for the night. Still, when she put her phone down, her heart felt heavier than before. Not because of what he said, but because of how deeply it resonated. The next day, Sarah met her friend Emily for coffee. Emily was cheerful and blunt, the kind of friend who noticed everything. "You look different," she said, sipping her latte. Sarah laughed. "Different how? Like you've been thinking about something. Or someone," Emily teased with a grin. Sarah rolled her eyes. "It's nothing like that. Just, life stuff." Emily leaned closer. "You sure? Because you've got that look like something stirred up your heart a little." Sarah shook her head but smiled. "Maybe I'm just realizing I've been living on autopilot." Emily's expression softened. "That happens when you've given so much for so long. But hey, awareness is the first step." Sarah nodded. The words made sense. She didn't want to cross any lines or chase something she didn't understand. She just wanted to feel alive again, to have conversations that mattered that evening. When she got home, David was already in the living room, half asleep with the TV on. Sarah paused by the doorway, watching him. There was comfort in his presence, but also a distance she couldn't ignore. She turned off the lights in the kitchen, her thoughts drifting again to Mark, not in longing, but in gratitude for reminding her what honest connection felt like. Later that week, David hosted another small gathering. A few coworkers came by, including Mark again. Sarah wasn't sure how she felt seeing him after their texts. When he arrived, his smile was warm but reserved. Their eyes met for just a second, longer than usual, acknowledging something unspoken. "Sarah, you look nice," he said, his voice polite. "Casual, thanks," she replied, keeping her tone light. Throughout the evening, they barely spoke beyond polite conversation. Still, Sarah felt a strange tension under the surface, not uncomfortable, just present. She realized that she wasn't drawn to Mark romantically. It was more that she recognized herself through his kindness. He saw her as a person, not just a role. After the guests left, David thanked her again for handling everything. "You always make it look easy," he said, patting her shoulder as he headed upstairs. Sarah stood there, watching him disappear up the stairs, and whispered to herself, "It's not always easy." She walked to the kitchen to tidy up and found a folded note on the counter. Her heart skipped when she recognized Mark's handwriting. It said simply, "Thanks again for everything. You remind me to appreciate the small things. M." She stood there holding the note, unsure what to feel. There was no hidden meaning, no inappropriate message, just sincerity. But that was exactly what made it powerful. That night, as she placed the note in her drawer, she realized that something about this quiet friendship had given her courage to look at her life differently, to speak up more, to reach for meaning where things had grown numb. Over the next few days, she tried something new. She started going on morning walks again, something she hadn't done since before her marriage felt distant. She joined a local art class she'd once talked about. She began in small ways to choose herself again, and every now and then, when she passed by the kitchen table, she'd think about that night after the party, not as a secret, but as a turning point. The moment she remembered what it felt like to be seen, the connection with Mark faded naturally. Not because of discomfort, but because it had served its purpose. It had reminded her that life still had depth if she dared to notice it as she stood one morning by the window. Watching the sunrise, Sarah realized she no longer felt invisible. She didn't need someone else to see her. She had started seeing herself again, and that, she thought with a quiet smile, was the greatest gift of all. A few weeks passed, and life in Sarah's house returned to its usual rhythm. The echoes of that quiet friendship with Mark had softened, fading into memory. Yet something within her remained different. She had begun to see the world in color again. She smiled more, laughed easily, and found herself humming while making breakfast. David noticed the changes, though he didn't fully understand them. One Friday afternoon, David surprised her by suggesting a weekend getaway. "Just the two of us," he said, holding up a brochure for a lakeside cabin. "No phones, no work, just us." Sarah was taken aback. It had been years since he'd made such an offer. "That sounds really nice," she said softly, and for the first time in a while, felt a spark of hope between them. By Saturday morning, they were driving through winding country roads, the city disappearing behind them. The air felt fresher, the silence comfortable. David drove with one hand on the wheel, occasionally glancing at her. "I thought we could use a little reset," he said. "I think so too," she replied, gazing out the window as fields rolled by. When they arrived at the cabin, the lake shimmered in the afternoon sun. It was peaceful, far from the noise, far from distractions. As they unpacked, Sarah found a small box among their things, neatly wrapped with a ribbon. She raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" David smiled shyly. "Open it later," he said. After dinner, the day went by in quiet simplicity. They cooked together, something they hadn't done in ages. They talked about the kids, their old trips, and even laughed over how bad their first apartment had been. For the first time in years, it felt like they were rediscovering each other, not as husband and wife bound by routine, but as two people remembering why they once fell in love that evening. After dinner, they sat on the porch with coffee. Watching the sunset, the lake reflected the golden light, and Sarah felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. David reached for the box and handed it to her. "Now," he said with a small grin, "open it." She carefully untied the ribbon. Inside was a delicate gold locket. When she opened it, she saw two pictures, one of them on their wedding day, the other of their children as toddlers. Her breath caught. Inside the lid, a small engraving read, "To the woman who keeps us together." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened as she looked at him. "David, this is beautiful." He took her hand gently. "I know I haven't been the easiest person to live with. I've been so wrapped up in work, in everything else, that I forgot how much I missed us." She blinked back tears. His words weren't perfect, but they were sincere. And that sincerity broke through years of quiet distance. They sat there in silence. Watching the last light fade over the lake, Sarah realized that maybe what she had been searching for wasn't something new, it was something old, something buried under time and routine. The next morning, she woke up early and walked along the lake. The cool air brushed her cheeks and she felt light. She remembered Mark's words, "You deserve to be seen." Now she finally understood them. Being seen didn't mean seeking someone new. It meant recognizing her own worth and demanding the same from the person she shared. Her life with David joined her soon after, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You always did like mornings," he said with a smile. "I forgot how beautiful they can be," she replied. As they walked, they talked about things that had long gone unsaid: fears, dreams, regrets. David admitted he had felt her slipping away but didn't know how to reach her. Sarah confessed she'd felt invisible for years, but she wasn't angry anymore. They listened to really listen, Dan, that made all the difference. Back at the cabin, Sarah took out her phone. There was a message from Mark. It was short and kind. "Hope you're doing well. Sarah, I'm moving out of town for a new job. Just wanted to say thank you for reminding me that kindness still matters." She stared at the message, her heart still for a moment. Then she smiled and replied simply, "I'm glad you found your way. Take care, Mark." She deleted the thread afterward, not out of guilt, but closure. That chapter had served its purpose. It wasn't about romance. It was about rediscovery. Later that day, she and David took the small boat that came with the cabin and paddled across the lake. The water sparkled under the sunlight. David laughed as he struggled to steer straight. Sarah couldn't stop smiling. It felt like the first time in years she had laughed without holding back. At one point, David looked at her and said, "You seem different lately, happier." "I think I am," she said. "Maybe I just stopped waiting for life to happen and started living it again." He nodded thoughtfully. "I like this version of you. I missed her." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "She's been here all along. I just needed to remember who she was." As the sun dipped low again, casting long reflections across the lake, Sarah felt peace. The ache that had followed her for months was gone, not replaced by something dramatic, but by something steady and real. That night they built a fire outside. The air smelled of pine and smoke. David pulled her blanket closer around her shoulders. "You know," he said, "I should have done this years ago." She smiled softly. "Better now than never." He looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I almost did," she admitted quietly. "But I guess I just needed to find a reason not to." He nodded. "And did you?" She smiled at the firelight flickering in his eyes. "I think I did." When they returned home a few days later, the house felt warmer somehow. Sarah placed a locket on the mantel where the sunlight hit it each morning. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a reminder of how fragile love could be, but also how strong it could become again. Days turned into weeks, and their lives slowly transformed. They began having breakfast together again. David made time for small things: a walk, a movie, a shared laugh. Sarah found joy in painting again, something she hadn't done since her 20s. Their children noticed the change too. "You guys seem happier," their daughter said one evening on a video call. Sarah smiled. "It just took us a while to remember how to be." Later that night, as she stood in the kitchen, she thought about the journey that had brought her here: the quiet loneliness, the unexpected friendship, the rediscovery of love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes life doesn't give you new beginnings. It gives you second chances disguised as ordinary days." The sound of David's laughter from the living room pulled her from her thoughts. She joined him, her heart light. In that moment, Sarah knew she had finally come home, not just to a house, but to herself. A few months had passed since the lake trip, and Sarah's home felt different now. The air seemed lighter, the rooms brighter. There was laughter again, real laughter, not the forced kind that used to fill the silence. She had started painting every morning by the kitchen window, and David always stopped on his way to work to kiss her cheek before leaving. It wasn't grand or dramatic, it was simple, and it was enough. But one evening, something unexpected happened that reminded her how far they had come. It was early spring, the kind of night when the air carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. Sarah was setting the dinner table when she found a small envelope tucked under her plate. She frowned playfully and called out, "David, what's this?" He came out of the kitchen smiling like a man who had been planning something all day. "Just open it." Inside was a handwritten note that said, "Be ready by 7. We're something that makes you feel like yourself." She looked up, amused. "What are you up to?" "You'll see," he said. And before she could ask more, he was gone again, pretending to busy himself with something in the living room. When the clock struck 7, Sarah came downstairs in a soft navy dress she hadn't worn in years. Her hair, now streaked with silver, framed her face beautifully. She wasn't the same woman she had been months ago. There was confidence in her step. Light in her eyes, David was waiting at the door, holding 2 umbrellas and a small smile. "You look perfect," he said. They drove through the quiet streets. The sound of rain tapping softly against the car windows. Sarah kept guessing where they were going, but David only smiled and said, "Almost there." Finally, he stopped near a small park, the one where they used to take the kids when they were little. The trees glistened from the rain, the streetlights casting golden reflections on the puddles. He held her umbrella as they walked toward a gazebo, where a small table was set with candles and 2 cups of coffee in THER Moses. Sarah gasped softly. "You did all this?" He nodded shyly. "I wanted to take you somewhere that mattered. This is where we used to sit and talk for hours. I thought maybe we could do that again." She looked around at the empty park, the soft drizzle, the glow of candles flickering between them. It felt almost magical. "You remembered," she whispered. "I never forgot," he said quietly. They sat sipping coffee and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his new project at work, and she told him about a painting she'd finished that morning. They laughed over memories of the kids' first camping trip, their first burnt Thanksgiving turkey, their old neighbor who always complained about the noise. But then David grew quiet. "Sarah," he began, his tone serious now. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." She turned to him, sensing the weight in his voice. "I've been thinking a lot about the past few years," he said, "about how I let us drift apart. I didn't realize how lonely you must have felt until I almost lost you emotionally. That's on me." Sarah looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "We both changed," she said softly. "Life happened and we stopped noticing each other." He nodded. "That's true. But I don't want to go back to who we were before. I want to keep moving forward with you. I don't ever want you to feel invisible again." Her eyes welled up. "David," he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "I know this might seem silly," he said, "but I wanted to give you something. A promise, not a gift." Inside the box was a simple silver band. "It's not a replacement for anything," he continued. "It's a reminder that every day I choose you." Tears blurred her vision. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried out of happiness. "You don't need to give me anything, David. You already have. You gave me us again." He smiled softly. "Then let's keep choosing each other." She nodded, unable to find the right words, and leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat there in the quiet rain, watching the park lights shimmer like stars fallen to earth. Later, they returned home. The house was silent, except for the soft ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Sarah walked into the kitchen and saw her half-finished painting a lake at sunset. Calm and endless. She smiled, realizing how far she had come. That night, as she got ready for bed, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the same tired face she had seen months ago. There was warmth there now, and strength. David came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're quiet," he said gently. "I'm just thinking," she replied, "about how lucky we are to still have time to fix things." He kissed her cheek. "We're not lucky," he said. "We worked for this." They climbed into bed, and as the rain fell softly outside, Sarah whispered, "I'm glad you stayed that night after the party." He chuckled. "So am I. Funny how one evening can change everything." She smiled and closed her eyes, feeling at peace. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The storm had passed, and the world outside looked fresh and new. Sarah got up early, made coffee, and walked out to the porch. She watched the birds gather on the lawn and thought about how life had quietly mended itself, not through miracles, but through effort, forgiveness, and small acts of love. She took out her sketchbook and began to draw the sunrise. Each stroke felt like a piece of her heart healing. A few hours later, David joined her, holding 2 mugs. "Painting again?" he asked. "Always," she said with a smile. He set the mug down beside her and looked at her sketch. "You've captured it perfectly." She laughed lightly. "It's not perfect, but it's real." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. From that day on, their life wasn't a fairy tale, was better. It was honest, simple, and full of second chances. Sarah learned that love didn't have to be loud or dramatic to be real. Sometimes it lived quietly in the ordinary days, in shared laughter, in the warmth of a hand that never let go again. Months later, their kids came to visit. The house was filled with noise and stories again. Their daughter noticed the silver ring on Sarah's hand and smiled knowingly. "You two look happier than ever," she said. Sarah looked across the room at David, who was laughing with their son. "We are," she replied softly. "We just needed to remember what happiness looked like." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, she stood at the window, looking out at the soft moonlight over the yard. Her heart felt full not of excitement or longing, but of peace. The kind of peace that comes after storms, when everything finally makes sense. She whispered to herself, "Some surprises aren't meant to shock you, they're meant to save you." And as the night settled in, Sarah smiled, knowing that this time love had truly come home to stay.